Lewis and I were identical in nearly every way. We shared the same sandy hair, the same piercing blue eyes, and even the same mischievous grin that drove our parents up the wall. Growing up, we were two halves of a whole, our lives so intertwined that it was impossible to imagine one of us without the other. We did everything together, whether it was exploring the woods behind our house, playing endless games of basketball in the driveway, or staying up late into the night whispering secrets and dreams. We were inseparable. Even our friends and teachers struggled to tell us apart, and we loved to play pranks, swapping places and watching the confusion unfold. Our bond was more than just physical. It was almost telepathic. We had our own language of glances and gestures, a silent communication that only we understood. It was comforting, knowing that no matter what happened, we had each other. But we weren't just best friends, we were rivals too. There was always a healthy competition between us, whether it was for better grades, faster race times, or who could tell the best joke. Lewis had a natural charm that drew people in, while I was more introspective, preferring to observe and think before acting. Yet despite our differences, we complemented each other perfectly. As we got older, our interests began to diverge. Lewis became passionate about music, spending hours in his room practicing guitar, while I threw myself into sports, determined to make the varsity basketball team. Still, our bond remained unshaken, and we always found time for our shared adventures. One of our favorite traditions was the annual summer camping trip with our dad. Every year we would pack up the car and head to the same remote campsite, far away from the noise and distractions of everyday life. Those trips were magical, filled with late-night ghost stories around the campfire, fishing in the clear, cool lake, and hiking through the dense forest trails. It was during one of these trips that we discovered an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The place was a wreck, with broken windows and a collapsing roof, but to us, it was a treasure trove of possibilities. We spent hours exploring, pretending it was our secret hideout, a place where we could escape from the world and be whoever we wanted to be. As the years passed, the cabin became our sanctuary. Whenever life got too overwhelming, we would sneak away, escaping to our secret refuge. It was there that we had some of our deepest conversations, sharing our hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. But everything changed on that cold December night. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, filled with warmth and laughter. We had just finished decorating the Christmas tree, a tradition that always brought our family together. The house was filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon, the soft glow of fairy lights casting a cozy ambiance. Lewis and I had been arguing earlier that day about something trivial: who got to put the star on top of the tree. It was a silly, childish argument, but it left a lingering tension between us. We barely spoke during dinner, each of us nursing our bruised egos. The fire started in the basement, in the room where our father kept his woodworking tools. We didn't notice it at first, too engrossed in our own worlds. It wasn't until the smoke alarm went off that we realized something was wrong. My father sprang into action, shouting for us to get out. The smoke was thick, filling the house with a choking haze. Lewis and I were upstairs, and as we tried to make our way down, the flames erupted, blocking our path. Panic set in, the reality of the situation hitting us hard. My father reached me first, his strong arms pulling me through the smoke and flames. I screamed for Lewis, but my voice was drowned out by the roaring fire. I caught a glimpse of him at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide with fear. Our gazes locked for what felt like an eternity, and then he was gone, swallowed by the inferno. The fire department arrived too late. Our house, once a place of warmth and love, was reduced to ashes, and Lewis, my other half, was gone forever. The grief that followed was indescribable, a constant ache that settled in my chest and refused to leave. My mother fell into a deep depression, her vibrant spirit extinguished. She would sit for hours, staring at old photographs of Lewis, her tears flowing freely. My father threw himself into his work, using it as a distraction from the unbearable pain. As for me, I was lost, wandering through life like a shadow of my former self. For a while, it seemed like life might return to some semblance of normalcy. But then, strange things started happening. It began with small, almost insignificant occurrences: flickering lights, unexplained hotspots in the house, the smell of smoke with no apparent source. At first, we dismissed them as coincidences, but the incidents became more frequent and more terrifying. The first real tragedy struck about a year after the fire. My mother was alone at home, lighting a candle in Lewis's memory, something she did every day. According to the fire report, it was a freak accident. The candle tipped over, igniting the curtains. By the time the fire department arrived, the house was engulfed in flames. My mother didn't make it out. Her death shattered us. My father and I were consumed by grief, barely able to function. We moved into a small apartment, hoping for a fresh start. But the fires followed us. Next was my father. He was a careful man, meticulous in his habits. But one night, as he was working late in his home office, the apartment building caught fire. The cause was never determined. My father died trying to save the other tenants. I was alone, the last surviving member of my family. The fear and paranoia became my constant companions. I was convinced that Lewis's spirit was behind the fires, seeking vengeance for his untimely death. The thought of my twin brother, once my closest friend, turned into a vengeful spirit was almost too much to bear. I tried to escape, moving from place to place, never staying in one spot for too long. But no matter where I went, the fires followed. I started seeing Lewis everywhere, in reflections, in dreams, in the flickering shadows of candlelight. His presence was a constant reminder of the past, a haunting specter that refused to let me go. One night I woke up to find my bedroom filled with smoke. The fire alarm blared and flames licked at the walls. I stumbled out of bed, coughing and disoriented, but there was no way out. The door was blocked by fire, and the windows were sealed shut. I was trapped. That's when I saw him. Lewis, standing in the midst of the flames, his eyes filled with sorrow and rage. He didn't speak, but I felt his anger, his pain. I knew then that I had to confront him, to find a way to make amends. "Lewis," I whispered, my voice choked with smoke and fear. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His expression softened, the flames around him flickering and dimming. For a moment it seemed like he might forgive me, but then his face twisted in pain and the flames roared back to life. I knew I had to do more. "I should have saved you," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "It should have been me. I miss you every day, Lewis. Please let me make this right." The flames around us seemed to waver and Lewis stepped closer. I could see the pain in his eyes, the torment that had consumed him. I reached out, my hand passing through the flames, and touched his ghostly form. In that moment, a wave of memories washed over me. Our childhood, the laughter, the shared dreams. I felt his pain, his anger, but also his love. The connection we had as twins, stronger than anything, was still there, buried beneath the anger and sorrow. "I love you, Lewis," I whispered. "I always have. Please let go of the anger. Let go of the pain." His eyes met mine, and for the first time since the fire, I saw a flicker of recognition, of the brother I had lost. The flames around us began to fade, the heat dissipating. Lewis's form grew faint, the anger in his eyes replaced by a deep, abiding sadness. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Tears blurred my vision and I nodded, unable to speak. In that moment I felt a profound sense of peace, a release from the torment that had plagued us both. Lewis's form faded, the last remnants of the fire extinguishing with him. The room was silent, the air clear. I was alone, but I felt a sense of closure, a peace that had eluded me for so long. I knew that Lewis had finally found rest, and that I could begin to heal. The days that followed were difficult, filled with grief and memories, but I no longer felt the oppressive presence of my brother's spirit. The fires had stopped, and for the first time since that tragic night, I felt a glimmer of hope. I still think of Lewis every day. I've heard the stories about Route 66, but I can't believe in something without evidence. Tonight, I'm determined to get to the bottom of the haunted road legend. I'm heading out to the spot where the accident supposedly happened, armed with my camera and notebook. This moonless night seems perfect for uncovering the truth. Driving down Route 66 is eerie. The forest feels like it's closing in around me. My headlights are barely cutting through the darkness. I feel a chill in the air that's more than just the cold. I've stopped at the ravine where the accident occurred. I'm stepping out of the car, flashlight in hand. It's so quiet out here. I'm standing at the edge of the ravine. I can't see anything in the darkness below. I've been taking photos and jotting down notes when I heard it. A faint whisper carried by the wind. My heart is pounding. I'm straining to hear more. The whispers are growing louder. They sound like desperate cries for help. Help us, please. I can't move. I turn towards the road and there she is. A woman in a tattered dress, her face pale, her eyes hollow. 2 children are clinging to her legs, their faces twisted in fear. I can't breathe. She's stepping closer, reaching out to me. Help us. Find peace. I'm terrified. I've stumbled back towards my car. The ghosts are closer now, their cries more desperate. I dropped my keys in my panic, but I finally grabbed them. Her hand touched my arm. It felt like ice. I'm in a frenzy, starting the car and speeding away. The ghosts' wails are echoing behind me. I didn't stop until I was safely back in Pine Ridge. I'm breathless, shaken. The townsfolk are listening to my story with solemn expressions. An elderly man said, "You're not the first to see them. Their souls are trapped, reliving that night over and over. No one's ever been able to help them move on. I'm still haunted by last night. I don't think I can ever return to Route 66. The memory of those ghostly figures and their mournful cries is seared into my mind. They're a chilling reminder of the restless spirits that linger on the haunted road. The legend of Route 66 lives on. They say that on moonless nights, if you dare to venture down that road, you might hear the cries of the lost souls, forever seeking peace they will never find." Mr. Taint had always been the black sheep of his family. Known for his reclusiveness and eccentric ways, he had few close relationships with his siblings, cousins, or other relatives. Despite their lack of affection for him, his death rallied them all together in the most superficial display of unity imaginable. The lure of his substantial wealth and the promise of inheritance drew them to his grand mansion like moths to a flame. When Mr. Taint passed away, there was no mourning, no tears, just the gleam of greed in their eyes as they anticipated the reading of his will. On the day of the will reading, the air was thick with anticipation. Mr. Taint's grand mansion, a sprawling Gothic structure, loomed ominously as his relatives gathered in the dimly lit parlor. They buzzed with excitement, their whispers blending into a cacophony of avarice. The old wooden doors creaked shut, and the windows, though tall and grand, remained firmly locked. No one seemed to notice or care about these small details. Their minds were solely focused on the riches they believed were about to be distributed among them. The lawyer, a stern man with a gaunt face and sharp eyes, stood at the head of the room. He held a thick envelope, sealed with the Taint family crest, and began to read aloud. As he spoke, the room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fireplace. "To my brother, Robert Taint," the lawyer intoned, "I leave my diabetes." Gasps echoed around the room. Robert, who had always prided himself on his healthy lifestyle, suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed to the floor. Panic erupted as the lawyer calmly injected insulin into Robert's arm. The lawyer continued unperturbed, his voice steady and emotionless. "To my cousin, Margaret Taint, I leave my gum disease." Margaret's hands flew to her mouth as she felt her teeth loosening. and within moments several of them fell out clattering onto the floor. Her screams were muffled by her horror. The reading went on, each inheritance more grotesque than the last. To my nephew, Charles Taint, I leave my tinnitus. Charles immediately began to clutch his ears, his face contorted in pain as a relentless ringing sound overwhelmed his senses. By now, the room was in chaos. The family members tried desperately to escape, but the doors and windows were inexplicably locked. No matter how hard they pushed or pulled, they couldn't get out. The lawyer continued reading, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil around him. To my niece, Clara Taint, I leave my migraines. Clara screamed and fell to her knees, clutching her head as waves of excruciating pain crashed over her. To my uncle, Edward Taint, I leave my joint problems. Edward's legs buckled, and he collapsed in agony, his joints stiffening painfully. Finally, the lawyer reached the last bequest. To my cousin, Lydia Taint, I leave my death. Lydia's eyes widened in terror, and she dropped to the floor, lifeless. The room fell silent, save for the sobbing and groaning of the afflicted relatives. Suddenly, the coffin at the front of the room creaked open. Gasps of horror filled the air as Mr. Taint himself sat up and climbed out. He was no longer the frail, sickly man they remembered. He stood tall and healthy, a triumphant smile on his face. He looked around the room, taking in the sight of his suffering family. "You never cared for me," Mr. Taint said, his voice strong and clear. "You only wanted my wealth. Now you have inherited what you truly deserve." With that, the doors and windows swung open, and Mr. Taint walked out of the room, leaving his relatives to their fates. He was finally free of his ailments, a healthy man ready to enjoy his wealth without the burden of his unloving family. As the afflicted relatives struggled to comprehend their new realities, they realized the bitter truth. They had been lured by greed, and now they paid the price. The legend of Mr. Taint would live on, not as a tale of inherited wealth, but as a cautionary story of how the greed of an uncaring family was met with a chilling and poetic justice.